Okay, we're live online, but we're still testing things. So if you all could just hold on for just a moment more. I'm talking again to check the audio. Okay.
The meeting's on and it's live.
Okay, can I get confirmation that Jasmine and Duncan and Deborah can hear and see us?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, this is Randy Martin. I can hear you fine.
This is really confusing.
There's Jasmine.
That's going to be really confusing now that I think about it.
I wouldn't worry too much about that. The speaker is coming through your laptop.
Right.
Through the,
Sorry. Yep. Select a speaker.
there we go.
Sorry, I thought it all switched over. Okay.
That should do it.
Can you all hear us? And can one of you say something?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. We're dealing with a little hybrid tech sitch. So we'll see how long we keep that up or if you all work on joining via the commission Zoom while we just get the meeting going. Because this is the host right now. But anyways, so what we're looking at right now is YouTube. That's probably a few seconds delayed of us. But we do have our members here. I'm going to work on fixing that so we can share screens and all that. But if you all would like to start the meeting, we are live and we are good to start. I apologize for the delay.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the November 20th meeting of the Economic Opportunity Advisory Board of Grand County. And we have some guests online, and we have an almost full table at the commission chambers. So we're going to begin with introductions, and we'd like to start with Jasmine, Randy, and Deborah, and whoever else might be online. So Randy, would you start?
Sure, be happy to, Forrest. This is Randy Martin, member of the board representing the Moab Area Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you. Thank you. Jasmine.
Jasmine Duncan. I'm the mayor of Castle Valley and a non-voting member of this board.
And Deborah.
I'm Deborah McKee, and I'm the outreach manager for the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity for Grand County.
And a great assist from Deborah this week, Deborah and Colette Cox. So we appreciate that and glad you joined us today. Let's start around the table, and may I begin with you, Alexi?
Yeah, Alexi Lamb, Strategic Initiatives and Sustainability for the City of Moab. I'm sitting in for Corey Shartleff.
Wonderful.
Ashley Kornblatt, member of the committee.
Iga Metzner Moab to Monument Valley Film Commission Director.
Lisa Junkers, member of the board, Community at Large.
Ben Frederigill, Director of the Economic Development Department.
Chris Wilson, member of the board, Private Sector.
Forrest Rogers, member of the board, citizen living in Grand County.
Alicia Oliver, I'm the commission coordinator.
I'm Quinn Hall, I'm the commission admin.
Ben Alter, non-member, economic development staff, sincerely apologize for the delay on getting us going today.
Thank you for doing that. First order of business is actually to ask if there are any conflicts of interest, disclosures, or ex parte communication that needs to be reported. Hearing none, citizens to be heard. I'm hoping we'll hear from all of the citizens who are sitting around the table and online today. No presentation. So the first item on our agenda for action is approval of the October 30 minutes. Meeting minutes, which were in your packet, page 4 to 17. So entertain a motion.
Those aren't the whole minutes.
Those aren't the whole minute.
No, just 4 to 6.
4 to 6, excuse me. Yes, you're right.
I don't write meetings like that anymore. Minute meetings.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion to approve those unless there are any corrections, changes, or recommendations.
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Chris. A second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Ashley Kornblatt seconded. All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. All voting members. Randy, you're with us on voting on this?
Yes, I vote aye.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. We are missing today, at least now, member Dave Sackerson and Zach Whitwell, who has been our interim representative from the Department of Workforce Services. We have some more bylaws work to explain, understand, and act on. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ben Alter to set the context and invite Alicia and Quinn to join as they may,
Great.
or as we need.
Thanks, Forrest. In the packet for today, I included a red line version of our bylaws. I'm going to pull up on my computer the live red line. I haven't made any changes since I created this packet, so it is apples to apples. It just looks a bit different because it's going from Google Docs to Word and all of that. But I wanted to start by talking about what we discussed at our last meeting, and that has been a fundamental misunderstanding of the state code that governs this board. We have operated under the premise that we need a Department of Workforce Services representative from the Utah agency, DWS, to take part in our workforce development representative role. Upon working with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, they have clarified to us that is not the case. And so that is why we started these bylaws revisions. While a revision wasn't necessarily required, it does seem that since we've been operating under that definition, it'd be good to add some extra language to kind of create a operational definition of what we think a workforce development representative is. And so using the comments that you all provided online and the language that GOEO provided us, we were able to create a operational definition of workforce development representative. That is included in these revised bylaws so that should they pass to the commission, we can then start recruiting for a workforce development representative that's not necessarily from DWS. It could be someone involved in career and technical education in the schools. It could be someone who's doing business navigation and resource management. There are a lot of ways that workforce development representative can go. That operational definition is included down here. It includes A through D here. Things like career and technical education, upskilling and workforce training programs, resource navigation. It can also be someone from a firm that just has a lot of employees and has really good luck retaining those employees and has workforce development as a maintained strategy of theirs. So that's an introduction to what we talked about at our last regularly scheduled board meeting. Since then, in talks with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, we've also learned that we've been kind of operating under a general misinterpretation of the statute that establishes this board. The statute that establishes this board, which I reproduced in the packet, it's pretty short, it's right here. it has these 5 representatives, and these are all voting representatives. We have not treated the board this way. It's been a mixture. Some of those have voted, some of those haven't. And so working with GOEO and also talking with the commission administration, we proposed some bylaws changes that makes it clear that those are voting members, maintains our current members that are additional to those voting members, which we do have the power to add through that statute, and just makes it clear who everyone's role is. So I'm glad to go over the bylaws changes in a note by note fashion, but I did want to provide the board with this chart that I put together. This chart summarizes what the bylaws revisions will enact if we just pass them as they are written right now. So basically, these green rectangles indicate the required roles on the board. And so what we have right now, the biggest rub we have is that our director of the department is serving as our county rep. And that's not going to work going forward because he can't be the voting member on the board that's advising him. So we have proposed that a member of the commission administration fill that role instead. I'll note that GOEO has said that they prefer that not be an elected role, which also jives with county policy. That's a very special circumstance if that ever happens. And then what we're doing is we're creating in our additional membership, director of economic development department. So Ben stays on this role. He gets a new title, which happens to be his title, and he doesn't get a vote. I think some of the bigger changes to note here are that 2 of those roles that have existed for a while and are filled will get voting privileges. So Jasmine, putting you on full notice, if we go through these bylaws revisions and you want to maintain your role on the board, not to say maintain your membership, but that specific role as a municipality representative, you will become a voting member. So will our workforce development representative, which is Zach right now, but as he's let us know, he's happy to help us fill the gap. But once we have these bylaws passed, we'll be able to recruit someone from this community who's involved with workforce development. They will be a voting member. If there's no color on this chart, it means that the role and the membership remains unchanged. So I know that was a lot. It's a lot of procedural things, and I'm glad to answer any questions there are about it. But in sum, the bylaw revisions I've proposed will solve all of our problems and get us closer towards receiving our rural county grant funds, which should be sometime in the new year. Does anyone have any questions or anything that's confusing or all of it that's confusing?
Just to clarify, so this is basically, well, not exactly what's proposed, but having the municipality rep be a voting member, having the county representative be a new person and voting member, those are all changes that were recommended by GOEO to be in compliance with state law?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think they're actually required.
That's
Yeah.
a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and all of this arose from us turning in our rural county grant forms and them just noticing some discrepancies between how they track things and how we track things. I think that we have a really great active board, so I'm really thankful. They're not coming down on us in some sort of negative way, but they're giving us the polite nudge. You need to do these things to come to compliance.
Yeah. Okay.
And for Alexi and Corey's benefit, and Randy, for your benefit, we've spent much of the last 2.5 years working on these bylaws because this organization was blended with a separate county commission board or advisory council advisory board when the Rural County Grants program was instituted. So we're still working through this. I commend Ben for the clarity he's provided here. The state statute that Ben referred to does not indicate that whether those members, those 5 members are voting members or not. It just says these are the members. So the county had also expanded the list of types of representation, voting or ex officio. So this is, first of all, a chance to go back to basics, get what's really the 5 names that GOEO needs to be seeing and the 5 positions or roles that need to be voting. Could I say anything wrong in there?
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
Can you go back to the list?
Yeah.
This isn't a question, but a comment. I just want to say thanks a lot to Ben for taking a very complex, tangled web and simplifying it and making this as expeditious to understand.
Thank you.
I know you put a lot of work, so we do appreciate that work.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So we're gonna need a motion in a minute?
Mhm. Unless anyone wants to go through the bylaws and talk anything more about it, you can motion to forward them to the commission as I've revised them.
Okay. So I just have one question.
Yeah.
I think. So on the workforce development rep piece, you said that could be just a business owner.
I think it can be a business owner or a business operator in a business that has demonstrated that they have good workforce retainment strategies and development strategies. It's baked into their corporation. I don't want to, because I think we all think of Synergy and I don't want to single them out, but I definitely think that organizations that are certified B Corps are definitely great examples of organizations that might fit that bill. But I think it's exactly, yeah. So I've tried to put the language together and I included that as the last bullet because I think that's sort of like the last criteria we want when we talk about workforce development. Deborah's on the call. Deborah, do you want to talk at all about what GOYO is looking for when they're talking about workforce development representative?
Yeah, so I think just a comment specifically, if you're really looking at business owner or somebody from a private for-profit business, I think somebody maybe in HR or somebody in recruitment or somebody who works directly with the process of developing workforce in the area would be my best suggestion when it comes to that private organization, unless the organization, is education focused towards workforce or their specialty of the actual business deals with workforce directly. If that helps.
Okay. Well, in a small town with a lot of small businesses, the business owner is obviously the person who's really doing workforce development.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about flexibility going forward because it is a little bit of a challenge to fill all these spots. And so I was just trying to understand it a little better to know what flexibility we had.
Right.
But just owning a business in Moab means you really have to care about workforce development is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a big part of the job.
Yeah. And I absolutely get that. I think that, kind of like Ben said, that should maybe be towards a last, resort, because there are other options such as, other things that he has on the list, USU, career training organizations. I know that San Juan County's board, they use somebody from USU. But you can really be creative. So, and I mean, technically it's up to the board and for you guys to decide. I would just try and,
Got you.
Make the, best decision as you can, really.
So, Deborah, I just have a quick question. So when we're talking about that, in Moab, we do have a lot of nonprofits and some of them can be fairly large. For example, the hospital or CNHA or one of those, and they do provide employment for a very large number of people within our community. So when we're talking like private sector versus, not so much, does that fit into this as well and meet the goals of kind of the economic opportunity?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think somebody from, HR or hiring within the hospital, perfect, great. But yeah, I think you guys are right on track, honestly.
Okay. I just want to clarify so we're not just looking at only private business.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Any, even somebody from the high school, if there's a high school program with placing students in job placements or work placements, something like that even would work, I would think.
Okay, I'm gonna move that we recommend it to the commission.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
We're looking for a second.
Well, for purposes of discussion, I will second it so that we can get into the discussion about it.
Great. Yeah, what discussion do you all have on this?
It feels like you did a really good job. It would be another level of trying to compare what it was that we were trying to meet.
Mhm.
So I feel like, I don't know who else reviews it before it becomes the,
The question I would have is, this gets us compliant to proceed with our grant request,
Yeah.
right, Deborah? In the form that we have here?
I didn't quite hear.
With the form that has been edited here, that puts us in compliance to be able to proceed for our RCG and our COG grants, correct?
Yeah, as long as those 5 positions are voting members and they're filled, absolutely.
So as far as review, to answer that question, once it's approved by this board, then it does go to the admin office and it does go to attorney review as well. So
yeah, that's what
it goes,
I thought.
it hits 2 more reviews before it goes to the commission once you guys approve it.
So for our purposes, it looks to me like it addresses the issues, and thank you for working on it, Ben. And it seems like, while there might be some little detail somewhere, I'm not in a position to catch it. But the next step in the process would, if there was a comma missing, perhaps.
And this is a process, as Alicia said, because then once it is passed through by the commission, it goes to GOEO. They can then start working on the process of reviewing the grants, approving the grants, and funding them, and then dispersing the money to the recipients. And that's the key, because they may not get them in this year, and it may be a month or so into next year before they get them and have to spend them down in a short period of time.
And I will say that, correct me if I'm wrong, Deborah, but GOEO has reviewed our grants, and so we have the tentative green light. We just need to fix this. So once this is fixed at the commission level, we'll bring it back to the board, make some quick decisions about how membership shakes out, which can be basically what I've laid out in that chart. And then we can let GOEO know, hey, we're in compliance now. We begin the funds request process.
Yeah, and as far as I know, this is the only hiccup.
Okay.
Jasmine's got a question.
Jasmine?
Ben, can you maybe just explain the term limits for those roles and their new?
I think that the term limits will be governed by the terms that are in the bylaws already, which are 4-year terms.
Okay.
And I don't imagine anyone's term limit changing. It's really more of a question of designation on the board.
Well, I think for like the ex officio positions didn't really seem like they had a term. You know what I mean?
Yes, correct. Yeah. The positions that are termed are the ones that are laid out in state statute, and the additional positions down here that are appointed.
Okay.
Which are just extensions of what's laid out in statute. But you're correct. For example, Ben Fredrickle doesn't have a term or something. He's on till he's off.
Right. And I've been with this board for several years now, so you probably want to check on that. I'm happy to continue in the role.
You trying to bounce? Trying to get out of here?
I mean, just, you know.
Do you know when your
I don't think it's gone over 2, but I think I'm, you know, I've been here for maybe more than 4 years. I'm not sure yet.
We'll check it out.
And if, Jasmine, just so you know, if that is the case, if you're like, for example, if your term expires at the end of this year or it expired at the end of last year, it gets advertised regardless. So any terms that expire at the end of that year still get advertised, and they're still open for, you know, anyone else that fits that qualification to apply. So if you were the only one to apply, for example, if you were up last year and you were the only one to apply and they voted to put you on, which I guess they could not, but that doesn't happen very often, then you would just start your 4 years over. So I would imagine that this board kind of having all the shuffling that it's done, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a situation like that.
Right.
You're not getting away from us, Jasmine. So there's a motion on the table and some discussion. Unless there are no other questions, we'll move to a vote to approve the motion. Start with you, Randy, since it's hard for us to see you.
I vote yay.
Okay. And then within the room, those in favor, raise your hand or say aye. And the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you all very much.
With
Thank you, Ben.
great thanks to Ben.
Okay. Wonderful. That brings us on to our discussion Trail to Tomorrow action plan.
Yes, it does. So again, we're 2.5 years in, we're finally getting this thing crystallized. So we're going to move to our Trail to Tomorrow action plan and approval process. And I was unable to attend the November 7th meeting, but I understand it was fully engaged, lots of ideas and some steps, at least near-term steps to move forward. And Melissa has been voluntold or has volunteered to lead us through a summary of that discussion. And I'll turn it over to you.
Would you like me to pull this up now, or did you want
Sure.
to? Okay.
So just to give some background, we met, well, actually, starting back with the whole purpose of the discussion, was we said that we wanted to take a Trail for Tomorrow report and to be able to turn that into something that was actionable and something that was nuanced, because we live in a county and they don't necessarily live in a county. So what are the things that potentially they may have missed that are some nuances that they may not be familiar with? And we broke off into a smaller group, and then we met as a group and sort of went through all of those categories and whiteboarded a whole bunch of things. And we were able to capture those things. And then Ben and I were able to get on a call with the author of at least a lot of the data for the Trail to Tomorrow report,
Jeremy Sage. Yep.
Sage, who compiled the data for that report, and kind of spent the next week going through a summary of what came out of the smaller meeting, which I apologize, was supposed to go back to the group for review, but didn't get finished up until today, maybe a couple of hours before this meeting. So I'm really sorry. So they're seeing it for the first time too, but hopefully that's what this meeting will do. Is it an accurate capture of what we talked about? Is it useful, helpful? What needs to change, and do we even like it as a framework? So that we could move on to the next steps, which would be then what Ben distilling that into an approach for the general plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah.
Thank you for working on it.
Amen.
And I have some notes and I'm just hunting them down.
Perfect.
Hang on. There's one little bit of language in there. This is fancier than the version I have.
Well, I didn't distribute this yet.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
And I am positive that there should be a lot of notes and comments about it.
Yeah.
That's what it's.
Yes, there are more slides.
Okay.
Yes.
Why don't you go present it?
Yeah,
I'll
let's
find my notes
do
on the
that.
version that I have.
Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, I think present sounds like a really formal. What I was hoping to be able to do is that we can pull it apart for discussion and see if we like the framework, and if the framework works, what needs to be added or taken away, or if it's even going to work for us at all. So there's a lot of stuff in there, like an executive summary, for example, not necessary to go through it, because if the points don't hold up and we don't love the framework, it doesn't matter. We're gonna have to pull it apart and redo it anyway, which is kind of what Ben and I discovered in the process with the conversations too with Jeremy, is there have been probably 4 or 5 different approaches to a framework that when you start to add decision-making into it, doesn't necessarily hold up. And so this was the one that no matter what I was able to slide in there, it still kind of held up as a decision-making framework. And so now that's the one that we get to pick apart.
All right.
Okay?
There's one, I'll find it. You sent, the one that you sent out.
Well, actually, let's go through this.
Yeah,
and
let's
then
just
we
go
can
through it.
cut- and then
I'll
we
find
can-
it. There's one thing that we want to switch pretty fast because it's got some, if it's still in there, it was kind of a little triggering that we want to avoid.
Okay, absolutely.
And so,
Please.
but that was the only thing that was
Please.
like jumped out at me, but
Please.
otherwise, really great job. So let me find that.
Go ahead.
Nothing like saying there's a problem, but I can't tell you.
No, so the first section, no, please find it,
Yeah, I
please,
will.
because that's what the purpose of this is for. So the first part, the first section of it is basically a situational overview. And this is really, really important because if we're not all on the same page and we are not using the right language, which is why I'm really interested in what you're saying is triggering language, there are a lot of words that have intentionally been chosen. And it may not be that they're the correct ones, but they were chose really specifically. So those are the ones that I kind of want to pull apart because they're precise, but they may not be accurate. So as we go through the situational overview, it's just a snapshot of all the data from Trail for Tomorrow. Tons of data. How do we distill it down into the most useful pieces? So that's what the first section is. So we just want to,
Do you want me to spend time on this?
no, we can all read it. Like,
I don't know.
I kind of,
There we are.
so then the executive summary is just sort of based on what we'll get to with the more salient points.
I don't know why it looks like that. Doesn't look like that on my end. Anyways.
Ghost image.
So if we kind of want to just go through to the next one.
Mhm.
This is where we start to get into the meat and potatoes of what could be potentially triggering and some of the
Yeah,
things
okay.
that are really, really nuanced. So taking all of the Trail for Tomorrow data, everything that we had up on the board, and pulling out of that, the words underneath the photo, so the facilitating public land use and visitation, that part is really important. Because whether or not we agree with that, that's going to drive the assets and also some of the constraints. So in our conversations with Jeremy and in our conversation that we had as a smaller group, what we kind of came to is that our role isn't necessarily tourism. It's facilitating public land use and visitation.
Right.
So we call it tourism and that's great. But kind of the test that I put it through coming from every angle is, if, for example, 15 miles down the road from Arches Park, another town popped up that wasn't called Moab, but that was called something else. And it had better bars, better restaurants, better hotels, more selection, trendier, kind of funner to be. Would we still be the go-to place? Maybe, maybe not.
That's those are two really interesting concepts. So on the second one, that is I've never in thousands of meetings about gateway communities had anyone.
That's the
pointed out that way.
definition of a gateway community.
And that was interesting to say, what if a better gateway community opened up down the road, you'd get your ass kicked? Like, that's
Well,
interesting.
Maybe,
So,
and
yeah.
maybe people,
Maybe
you
not.
know,
But-
maybe
but-
we built enough of a brand, I don't know.
But by definition, though, Moab's location to the recreation assets has been designed through the BLM resource management plan and where the trails are. And so I'm not so worried about that, but it's a good exercise to see if we could do a better job. But the real fundamentals here, though, are that facilitating public land use, and I would just call it, I might say visitor management instead of visitation in general, just to be slightly more specific, but I really like the facilitating public land use and just visitor management because that's so much of what we're talking about. Because the communities that are doing a good job of visitor management, by definition, that means that they're not hurting the resource. If you're doing a good job of visitor management, they're not decreasing local quality of life because you're doing a good job of visitor management. So I think that's a really great phrase and I love it. So facilitating public land use, and I would just say, and visitor management, so that we're talking about being a little more proactive, not just this amorphous blob of visitors that we're hoping to steer around a little bit. We're actually going to manage them.
Ben, go ahead.
So your analogy is a good one. And in the USU base camp, they did start addressing this a lot. And Jeremy, I think, was in some of those meetings, but for instance, Jackson Hole is starting to find out that much of their visitorship into both Yellowstone and Tetons are day trippers now that are staying in Idaho. And so they're not monetizing that visitor model, which we are starting to see a little bit of that with Green River. We have people day tripping a lot into Moab now from Green River. One thing that we have different is we have a very high inventory of lodgings. So that is an asset we can put in our framework. But Ben and I were on some calls today where we're starting to get a data set that shows how far people are traveling and stuff. So I would just echo what you're saying, but it is not assumed that the visitor is actually going to come here. They're not just going to be a day tripper.
Well, and I think, okay, so where this becomes really, really important is when we get 3-4 slides into this, you're going to see why this is so important. And so that's why I'm saying, listen, this is really precise.
Yes.
We're checking it for accuracy because the words that we're using are really precise. Because the other piece of that is what you just said, we don't own those assets. They don't belong to us. So if, for example, Arches were to shut down or BLM,
they're owned by all
yes,
of us.
yes. No,
But-
100%
yeah.
agree with you. But what I'm saying is that
We don't have total
they don't belong to
control
our
of them.
economy.
Right. We are not the managers of them. We have to work with the land
Correct.
managers that work for all Americans. So yes, that relationship, when you put the business lens on it, it's a funny thing
Mhm.
that we don't own the assets that run our business.
Chris?
Could I just ask a question? Like, I'm like trying to step back. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what we're doing right now. So what is this? This is a presentation about the process that we're doing, or this is a presentation, is this the proposed change to the general plan? Like, what
No.
are we looking at?
We're looking at a summary of the position points for agreement and the set of facts that will create that framework that will lead to the general plan. Does that make sense?
Okay, so it's kind
Maybe.
of summarizing the process and where
Correct.
we're at. Right
Yeah.
now.
Exactly, like,
Summarizing the
here's what we
discussion
know
so
today.
far.
Like, this is what we know, and based on what we know, these are the decisions that we would make. And based on those decisions, this is the plan that would need to be in place to facilitate that.
And it's kind of a boiling down. It's boiling down the whole
We're
Trails to
starting
Tomorrow
here.
thing to some certain principles that really do affect our economy. And if you don't, and it's really, if you want to do anything with our economy and you haven't understood these principles, it's going to be hard to move the needle on our economy because these are the things that drive it.
But if this document isn't going to the commission or becoming policy, then why do we need to be so precise? Or
Because
like, why do we have to agree
Because
on it?
it's the language that we use. So for example, when we get to the assets slide, you're gonna see why it's so important
Okay.
that be correct, because if that's not correct, then we have a different set of assets than the ones that we think that we have.
right,
Yeah, so I'm gonna, for time's sake, I'm gonna take notes of where we're having this kind of discussion. So we can go through the entire show because you're teasing us about what's coming up in the next couple of slides. Just personally, I think the first line under the caption just reframes what we mean when we talk about tourism.
Mhm.
For me, that's a
And it's
personal approach.
important for us to meet because one of the arguments that we have is, do we want tourism? Do we not want tourism? Do we like tourism? Well, first of all, let's make sure that we're calling it specifically what it is. And that may or may not be tourism, depending on if we agree to that before we walk out of here, right? And second of all, as we go through this, as long as everyone's dealing with the same set of information, we're okay to have those opinions, but we're not all dealing with the same set of information that we agree to be true.
Yeah.
Then we may have less to talk
well,
about.
I think it's really excellent because if you're really looking at what drives our economy and what opportunities do we have to control it. And if we were Paris or Santa Fe or wherever, you would have to answer that question differently, right? But if we're going to really understand and get to any kind of agreement on what we should do to have a better economy and get away from this growth, no growth continuum, which is totally unrealistic and not right. All communities are changing all the time. And so we have to, it's not a question of are we for growth or against growth. It's a question of what drives our economy and how can we affect that economy in a way that will better benefit all of our community.
100%.
So that breaking it down like this to me makes a lot of sense, but I know what you mean, that it was kind of like, wait, where do we get to the paragraph? But so keep going. I found my thing.
Let's go.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
Thank you.
and just really quickly, because I don't want to leave that, because that's really, really helpful. When you talk about Paris or whatever, the difference for me is with Moab, with tourism, they're not coming here for our opera. They're not coming to tour our churches. They're not buying tickets to see our UNESCO sites. They're literally coming here to buy gas, sleep, get some food, do some stuff so that they can go out and enjoy these public lands.
Right.
And that really is a shift or a way of looking at it that comes to be more impactful as we go down. So if we go back to the direct slide, because I want to touch on that data. So what Trail for Tomorrow came back with is they said, look, the direct tourism industry, that's hospitality, food and beverage, and services that are specifically related, make up 87% of our taxable sales in our economy, make up 52% of our services taxable sales, and 49% of our residents are directly employed by what they call quote unquote tourism. So I work for a tour company, I work for a hotel, I work for a restaurant, I work for whatever.
But we should be reading that 49% of our employees are employed because of their facility, because of public.
Directly by.
Directly
by.
Yeah.
So that's the industry. So when you think of
Right.
tourism as an industry now instead of a word. So when we say tourism industry, it's hospitality, food and beverage, tours, entertainment, recreation. They're employed directly.
Right, but those things only exist because of the public
Correct.
land. And so we're trying to tie those closer together so that people don't see it as, well, because there literally are folks. I've had a city manager one time in this county say to me, well, the trails are not in the city, so they're not important to the city.
Okay, we'll get there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So that's our direct economic impact. And here's some of the stuff that we really beat up with Jeremy when we had our call with him, because he was data dude.
Yeah.
What we're adding to this, because it's really, really important, is the next slide. And that's our indirect economic impact.
Right.
So all of that visitation to public lands, everyone who comes to use them, recreate, play on them, go to the parks, whatever. There are certain assets that we have that employ more people and contribute more service taxable revenue that we would not have if it wasn't for that visitation and that outdoor recreation use. So some examples of that, and these are just examples because it goes really deep. Sheriff's Department, solid waste, all of those things, right? But we wouldn't have the regional hospital that we have to support a town of less than 6,000 residents and a county of less than 9,000 residents. We wouldn't have the EMS the size that we do with all their assets, resources, equipment. We wouldn't have a recreation center the size that we have. We wouldn't even have our public library the size that we have, not the Sheriff's Department, not any of those things, were it not for those indirect impacts. So I put in the indirect impact that's coming straight from the economic definition of what an indirect impact is, which is I work for this industry, I work to support this industry. And even though I'm not employed by the industry, I'm only working to support the industry because that's what's here. So that's our indirect impact. And then we've got a third one, which is our induced impact. And what that induced impact is, and again, going through the filters of economic impact, how that's defined is all of those folks that are either directly employed by that industry that we're studying or that are indirectly impacted by the industry that we're studying. It's every dollar that they spend in their community. So if I prepare taxes for the people that live in the community, if I sell insurance to the people that live in the community, if I'm a daycare provider, if I'm a whatever, induced economic impact is the money that those folks who are either directly employed by or are indirectly impacted by, that's money that they're out and about spending in our economy.
Yeah.
So they're buying a coffee, they're paying for childcare, they're going to a movie, whatever. but that's our induced economic impact.
Yeah.
So, oh, go
Do you
ahead.
have an induced economic cost?
Say that again.
You have an induced economic cost as well?
When we deal with just the economic terms, they're only dealing with economic impact in terms of driver. So what you're talking about are those things like mitigation expenses, like we
Well, I'm
wouldn't
also
have to
talking
have
about-
those things.
I'm talking about too, that our locals are paying for a trash service that visitors are not paying for. Stress on our water system, and stress on our solid waste.
But those are the details that we want to get to the point where we're building this framework so we can have a conversation about those details
Okay, but
in
I'm
a
saying,
way that is not totally politicized.
no, but there's a cog with all these,
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know that they even measure that.
Yeah,
Is there a way to get to that, Ben?
Get
Do you
to
know?
no. I mean,
Because I just know with economic development,
I
it's
don't
not
want
a
to
measure.
go on a rat hole, but you cannot conclude that because a town of 6,000 can be quadrupled in size on a weekend. And that hits your
no,
civil services.
that's, what you're saying is the whole point of the exercise.
Good, okay.
But
I just
to
want to make
get
sure you're
there,
thinking
yeah,
that.
to get there, what you have to do, like you have to say, okay, what is the economic driver for this community? The public lands. How do the public lands generate revenue? Through all these things you just went through. Some are direct, some are indirect. Those are all generating revenue. Now, when you say, okay, how does that affect locals? Like at the beginning of a budding recreation community, almost always the SAR costs fall on the locals, right? And so your first thing that happens is suddenly all these people show up and they get lost and now we got to pay to go find them, okay? Now, but then as you get a mature recreation community, and then, so once you agree on this stuff, then we can go back and do the work that you're talking about, Ben, which is to say, okay, great, we got a bigger hospital, but are they charging locals more or are visitors paying a chunk and are they paying for part of the doctors that we have here? B, because everyone gets paid per service, right? But on water, right, the visitors don't really have a way of paying for water. We pay for the water. So you can look at each of the big costs and start to say, well, how could we make it so that visitors are paying for it?
I just want to make sure
And
you're,
the distinction that I'm hearing what you guys are talking about, so here's, and again, if I'm hearing it incorrectly, that's where we all have to check each other.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying is, here's the reality of where we are. This is what our economy is. And now, what do we do with it? And you guys are having the question
next
about,
level.
great, what do we do with it?
Yeah. And so this is really, really good, I think, and a really good basis for us to get to the point that we would be ready to present this as background to the commission with this language that we're going to get to that goes into the general plan based on these concepts.
Right.
So
But we're not there yet.
we're not
So
even
let's-
close. I
Chris,
mean,
you
we're,
wanna say
Well,
something?
I just to follow up on what Ben said, I mean, I do think, and this relates back to our conversation 2 weeks ago, whenever that was, like, to present this to a group of people that live in Moab and experience those impacts, the challenging ones, not just the good ones, every single day, it's not gonna feel real if page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all just about the good stuff, how wonderful it is that we have all these visitors, without acknowledging right next to that, right up front, the challenges. And so if it doesn't work in the framework, that's going to actually end up being a problem with the framework,
sure,
for that to all end up on page 15, 16, 17, and 18.
sure.
But so
Agreed.
we just need to find a way to communicate this in a way that feels real to the people that live here, so it doesn't feel like pie in the
So
sky.
you
Yes,
could do
and
it in
this
a-
is just
Excuse
for,
me.
sorry,
No, I'm sorry. We got a lot of conversations going on. I want to make sure that the folks online are able to hear this conversation and see the shared slides. So Jasmine, you're able to follow all of this? Okay.
and this is literally just for us
Yeah.
to be able to have this conversation, because if it's the wrong one, the conversation doesn't go anywhere else. And that's what I was talking to Ben about a little bit earlier, and what he and I have been talking about this week, is if the framework isn't right, this is just for this group,
And
because I agree with you.
Yeah, this is a working thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that in the executive summary, you could say, we're gonna go through where the money comes from, and then we're gonna go through the costs. Like you could set it up so that you're not just trying to push, we're not trying to sell anything here, we're trying to analyze it.
Yeah.
And express it in a way that people can understand, and that would get us to the point where we could say, you know, for example, the hospital, the visitors are paying for their share, and that makes it possible for us to have a great doctor here because half their salary is coming from visitors. On the water, not so much. And then look at each of these different pieces. But, okay.
Ashley, let's keep
going.
going forward,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
This is one of the challenges when you see what is essentially a working draft presented as if it was going to be presented to the corporate board of an entity.
Did I make it too pretty?
It's really good.
No, you didn't make it too pretty. You made it.
It's literally just for this group.
Yeah, you made it accessible to us.
Okay.
And we just want to keep going through it.
Okay.
And then, as I said, I'm trying to capture, and we'll have this recorded, so we'll be able to come back and do pretty. It's
great.
It's very professional.
Okay.
It's
next,
just
you
helpful
ready
for me to be able to see it. Okay, so this is why it gets important, and you'll be able to see that now, is because in talking with Jeremy, saying, okay, if everything that we've talked about so far is true, and again, if it's not true, these are the things that we need to be evaluating. If what we've talked about so far holds up, then we have 3 key economic assets for our economy. And that's our built infrastructure, which is what you were saying earlier, Beth. We have hotels, we have restaurants, we have things that already exist. Somebody else would have to go out and buy those things or build those things. We have them already. We've got human infrastructure, which is a bunch of highly skilled folks at outdoor recreation, emergency medical services, how to treat injuries. We've got search and rescue, right? We've got this highly skilled human infrastructure. And then we have 3 million plus annual visitors. And what we talked about in our breakout session was that these are basically like a refreshed group of primarily new, but some repeating consumers that come to us each year. So, you know, it doesn't matter what we would try to sell them, how we monetize, what we would do with them. That's a pretty unique asset for a town our size in a rural community, is that we have those folks coming in as an influx every single year.
So I think you have to add public land to this and say we have 4. Because the built infrastructure and the human infrastructure and the visitors is only here because of the natural infrastructure.
That's why we've got the 3 million annual visitors, and this becomes really important because this is where the breakdowns happen. And this is where we need to decide if this is correct or not. What we talked about with Jeremy is those 3 million visitors are only coming to the public lands.
Right.
That's all they're coming to do, but the public lands, we don't own them as an asset.
So what? They are, just because we don't own them doesn't mean we don't have many, many mechanisms for controlling them. Like the way the public land system is set up is for communities to be involved in decisions that are made on the public lands. We need to not see them as something, we don't own them, so they're not part of our analysis. I think that would be really fundamentally missing it, because it is the fundamental asset. Without that, there aren't the 3 million visitors, the built infrastructure wouldn't be here, nor would the human. So I think, and that is the point, the communities that are winning in this game have strong nonprofits or county relationships with their land managers that then make them part of the conversation, not some separate thing that we wouldn't be talking about. So I think it has to be in here in some way, because otherwise you're just like, can we better manage the restaurants? Can we better train the people? Can we get more visitors? Okay, but we also need to be managing the public lands. Like you said, our whole job is facilitating, our whole economy is facilitating public land visitation. To do that, you got to make sure that you see the public lands as the asset. I mean, for example, we're about to mark 50 miles of hiking trails. The BLM is about to mark 50 miles of hiking trails on BLM lands. That is a huge, almost new asset for us, because before, visitors didn't do that much hiking on BLM lands because it wasn't marked. So, but we could have, they happen to be driving that initiative, but we could have asked for it. So we do have control over these public lands, even though we don't own them, and we need to really make sure we're keeping that in mind.
Alexa, you wanted to jump in here, please.
Oh,
Or at least you're nodding in.
no, I mean, I was agreeing with her because I think if we aren't paying attention right to that asset, the one that's driving this whole thing, we get into a lot of problems because people don't want to come if the lands aren't in good condition or if the trails, they're getting lost or, right, word of mouth, they have choices. They can go other places. Like if they hear that Moab's not taking care of things and that there's human poop on the side of the trails, they're gonna go find someplace else.
It's true. And
So that's my question. So, and here's where, and again, subtlety and words and nuances are really, really important. That's why later on the language is partner with, apply pressure to, request, develop better relationships with, because that's the languaging that we use if that doesn't belong to us and it's not in our control. The other way is if we control it, we're creating hiking trails, marking more trails,
Yeah.
right? It drives the language. So if we say that's our asset, then that changes the language in the plan further down from things like partner with, hire a dedicated resource for.
Right, right.
So that's why it's important, in my mind, it's not an asset, meaning that's why later on in the plan, I would use words like, we need dedicated partnerships with, we need to work with public lands in order to assert pressure
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
So
because
this
that's not listed as our
This is
asset.
why Trail Mix was created 20 years ago, to partner with, to control. We already have a tool in place. Now, is it comprehensive? No. Could it do more for motorized? Yes. Is there a conversation about that? Yes. But I think this is really close and really excellent. I just think that it is the successful public land gateway communities do not put their public land in a different category, that it is their asset. It is, even though it's owned by all Americans, it's our asset, and how do we control it to better facilitate public land visitation, which is the driving force behind our economy. And so I just think it feels like it just needs to be layered in here a little bit more, because otherwise it's like, oh, let's just make our restaurants better. Or, oh, let's just
Well, I
have a
think
better workforce, you know?
Some of it could be framing, like this is, as you said, just for us.
Yeah.
That there could be a situation in which it's like, okay, here are our assets. These are the ones we control. This is one we don't control, but we can influence. In which case, the language might be the same, and it would just be in the final presentation that would be a little different of like setting up the frame for how to think about it.
Yeah.
So
We're
maybe
into semantics quite a
going.
bit right here, I think. But I think everything that you're saying is great, and I think this is good, and we can go to the next one.
Let's do that. And then when we have time, after we've had a chance to see all these and had short discussions, we can come back and say, where do we really need to focus? I mean, I don't see us putting a presentation like this on, or a report on for months, so we've got lots of time to do that. So if you would, Ben, can she move forward? She did.
No, seriously though.
I'm with you.
I was just film too, and that as an economic driver and relation to the public land,
getting
and
there,
relation to
sister.
stewardship of the land.
We're getting there,
Just,
sister.
I haven't seen a little
Oh, you
camera
wait.
on there
There's
yet.
a whole section. There's a whole
Actually,
section.
let's just go through this to forest, but that's why I've been quiet, because I had a question I've been struggling with off that last slide, but I think you're answering it right here. So can we just go through it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we accept that those are our three assets, right, then what we would say would be the kind of corollary challenges that you're talking about, Ben, is one of them is, and this was all over in the report, we have a huge workforce shortage, no matter who you talk to. So it doesn't matter what they're doing within the community. That was pretty consistent feedback all the way through Trail to Tomorrow. The second one is kind of speaking to Chris, what you were saying, and also what Ben was saying as well. It's resident sentiment. So if you read through there, they might not necessarily love tourism or agree that it's important or want to build it. And what if I don't want more of it? And what if I think it's kind of a pain? Somehow that needs to be managed with communication strategies or with action items and whatever, but that's a huge constraint and challenge that was all over in the report as well. And then external market vulnerability was another one that was all over the report. So that kind of correlation between public land visitation and use and what happens to our economy and whether visitors come or don't come or whatever, that was listed as a vulnerable point.
Yeah. It's just, again, well, I don't think it should be framed as a choice, but that's okay. Let's keep going because we can build it. I mean, you could say I don't like tourism, then you probably don't need to live in Moab because
That's not
it is our
true.
own
That's not true, and I'll tell you later why.
Okay.
I don't know why that slide's coming out that way. All right.
I hear what you're saying, but I'll tell you a different argument to that. Did we read this one?
No, that was just.
I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to everyone's
just a, like,
concerns. I'm
cover
just
here.
saying that it's not like we have another option.
So if you want to go to the next one. So when you talk about options, right? This was, and here's the framework that we really need to beat up to, because this is what I was saying. It took breaking apart that report
Yeah.
and running through this a few different times to be able to answer what things are in and what things are out. And here was the framework that kind of held up, which is, and they have icons for a reason, not numbers. It's because they're not in order of priority and they all have to happen at the same time, I believe. Is you've got strengthen, develop, diversify, and evolve. So strengthen is, we already know that we have all of these challenges, right? We know that we have a workforce shortage. We know that we have housing scarcity. We know that there are a lot of challenges that we need to be working on. We know when we saw those numbers, whether you like tourism, don't like tourism, whatever, if we know that that much of our economy is direct economy and then indirect economy and then induced impact, then we know we've got to double down on it to have a healthy economy. Then I've got diversify, and here's where it gets interesting, and that shows up all through. So when you guys have a chance to go through this and read it, start picking it apart. I've heard you say this a lot, Ashley, and here's the reality, is when we talk about economic diversification, it doesn't change our assets and our resources and our challenges. So when you talk about diversification, you're still working with the same set of assets.
Right.
You've got the same skilled workforce, you have the same built infrastructure, same human infrastructure, same everything. Just because you want to diversify your economy for resiliency and to risk manage, doesn't mean that tomorrow, all of a sudden, we've got a biomedical field that we can pull from of, really skilled and gifted folks in that field. So we're still working with what we're working with. And you'll see that peppered all the way through here too. And then evolve. And in the evolve section is talking about all of those aspirational things that might pop up. So, and again, it all comes to cultivation. Like I guess that's the theme for all of the evolve category, is how do we cultivate an environment that will allow things to naturally emerge that don't use those same existing assets and don't use the same existing resources. And what you guys were saying is we talk about synergy all the time. And I think the reason why synergy gets brought up all the time is because there's a weird mushroom that popped up in the corn patch, meaning despite all the constraints, despite the assets and resources, they popped up and grew in a way that other businesses didn't pop up and grow. And what I will say about them is they couldn't be more of an outlier because they're almost 30 years old and they haven't grown a ton. But they're one of the largest private employers. What is it that made them successful here despite all the constraints and challenges, not using the same assets and resources as everyone else?
Well,
those are the things that you start to dig into. So you say, we're going to fix our housing shortage or our housing scarcity. We're going to really double down on our workforce shortage. We're going to cultivate an entrepreneurial environment that really encourages entrepreneurship. And then we're going to watch and start to see what emerges and start supporting it.
Sure. Okay, there's a couple things here.
Yes.
This is super good. Really appreciate all this work, and I think we're really on a good track here. The problem, so many public land communities are using their public lands not just to attract visitors, but to attract business investment, like a synergy, like a company that could locate wherever it wants, and they're choosing your small town because it has outdoor access. Now, obviously, places like Richfield and other places that just have new trail systems but do have housing stock and do have workforce are going to be more attractive to business investment than Moab that doesn't have housing stock and doesn't have workforce, right? So when we talk about diversification, like, I think that idea that it's being so dependent on tourism is somehow a bad thing, and we should do anything we can to reduce that dependence. I think we need to think about that a little bit differently. So I think we need to do some work about that word diversification, because you're right, we ain't got none. We got one mushroom in the corn patch. And so we need to really think about how that would look, and what we need to dive deeper into that. But the triggering words are on this slide. So the step under strengthen, the remove barriers and challenges to stabilize Grand County's economy and support its essential role in facilitating public land use. So in the world of land management, which is the parallel universe that you have to live in, if you're gonna be a gateway community, you have to think about how the economy works in the gateway community, and then you have to think about how the land management system works. And when people say remove barriers, that is kind of code for let us do whatever we want out there.
Got it. Because
So
what for me it was code for is we don't have enough housing.
I get it.
And
I
we
see
don't have
exactly
enough
what you're
folks.
trying to say. But when it's used in the same paragraph with public land, and facilitating public land use. So I think I just think it's a little bit of semantics and language. We can work on it a little bit, because what we want to do, I think you say it the more positive way, optimize public land use to strengthen Grand County's economy. Something like that. We could play around with it.
You know, I think we can do some wordsmithing after we get through all of this, and
But I just want to make sure this doesn't go too far out into the public.
It's only going to us.
it's,
That's it.
it's not going
It's just
anywhere
us. Yeah.
Okay.
except within this room and by
Just
email
us.
off to folks who are,
Right.
um,
So we can flip that around, and then it would be fine.
and I want to acknowledge that Dave Sackerson has joined us. Thank you, Dave.
Do you want to
Yes, I will
drive
make
his?
every attempt to push the correct button.
Okay.
Those are the same
Did I
point.
get to the right one?
Yep. So we're just going on to
Okay.
the same things.
You can go to next, right?
Well, let's take a look at reviewing it first, because there is more detail.
So essentially, it's just, again, more detail of what was on the first. But what Biga was saying about film, that's covered under diversify, which is basically looking for more uses of people who want to come here for those same beautiful public lands. So it's the stuff that we've talked about before. Is it wedding, corporate events, film and content creation? Like all of those different things that, again, you're using the same infrastructure. You want to come for the same reasons because it's absolutely beautiful, but it's not as volatile as tourism, and it's not as, hey, we'll just kind of pitch what happens or what comes. Instead, it's we're making our own kind of flow of folks using the same assets and the same resources that we have.
Sure.
And maintaining stewardship of the land.
Correct,
While
yeah.
doing so through the land use agencies.
Biga, would you say that louder so that folks can hear?
I think I said, and maintaining stewardship of the land through the film productions, going through the land use agencies and properly
Right,
permitting and things like that. So it's being,
being a steward.
responsible and being a steward and a film ambassador, let's say, call it.
Sure.
Okay, the next slide.
Thank you.
And then it just goes into planning, which we don't have because, as we all are aware now, there's so much to go through in kind of the setup and does the framework work before we ever get to planning.
Mhm.
But the one thing that I did in the Word doc, and I'm not sure if you sent the Word doc out,
I did do that.
Yes. Well, I
but in
got
the
a
Word
Word doc.
doc, no, the new
Or
one.
the outline.
Oh, I could,
Sorry.
I could pull up.
Yeah, if you want to pull up the new one, what I did was I pulled every single suggestion from the Trail to Tomorrow report and tossed it into one of the categories where it belongs based on those definitions.
This one here?
Just to kind of see how it holds up under pressure,
Down further.
and highlighted the ones that,
So are you proposing that we don't use the Trail to Tomorrow framework?
yeah,
'Cause-
I don't,
which was fundamentals, tourism adjacent and entrepreneurship. and engineer tourism to support community happiness and quality of place.
Yes.
I agree, because I think what we're doing is we're using that work and analysis to get to a place that's gonna give us some fundamentals that, as a community, if we see this is what these are our driving forces, then we can start to do the work to understand how to make this economy work better. So I think Trails to Tomorrow was a great start, but this evolution is, if we can use this towards working on the general plan, it gives you the framework to then do the work that we were talking about a minute ago and try to figure out how do we make sure that tourism is paying for itself.
Like I can give you some examples of how it doesn't hold out. If you go down to the highlighted portions in Diversify, so all I did was just do a 1-to-1 poll. So everything that they suggested as a strategic component and then the actions there.
This is what you're looking at here?
Advanced flow.
Oh, here we go.
And then
Lead
okay,
diversity.
go up to Diversify. Sorry. Yep, there we go. So, okay. So for example, what they say is one of their 3 paths. They've got a whole section on Diversify. And again, when we said,
The 3 paths are fundamentals, tourism adjacent, and entrepreneurship.
okay, so this one goes under entrepreneurship for theirs.
Okay.
So I pulled it over into our framework under Diversify. And basically what they do is they say we need more commercial space. We need to identify more commercial space so that we can attract businesses. And then another suggestion that they have is we need to start reaching out to businesses to attract and recruit businesses to come here because it's a really pretty place. That doesn't work for us if we agree to this framework.
Right.
Like if we say, here's the framework that we have, we can go out and identify public land that we can lease and put a big business park there. And Ben and his economic development team can go out tomorrow and start recruiting businesses in biotech, or hey, don't you want to come and live here because it's a really pretty place. We have all these amazing public lands. We have a housing scarcity. We've got a workforce shortage, and we don't have a skilled workforce in biomedical engineering.
Yeah, so that's exactly.
So it's not helpful. And that's,
I agree, totally agree.
that's what I meant when I said, like, as you started to break it apart.
I just have a concern about us redoing the work that we just paid consultants to do with extensive public input.
It
And-
wasn't that extensive.
No,
It's more than what we've done in this room, you
But I
know,
agree.
it's a lot more than 5 people around a table just kind of deciding what it is. you
Right,
know?
but
And the commission's already seen it, like, there's already some buy-in. I'm just reluctant to let go of something, like, I'd rather personally continue a process and improve the process than restart a process, which is a lot of, like, this feels like a fundamental break with the process that's underway to me personally. And so I just have some concerns that we're opening ourselves up to getting asked some tough questions about, like, about what happened, having to justify everything that we put down, because there's already a justification built into that report because there was a process behind it. It's a county, I mean, the county paid for it, the county endorsed the process, and now the county wants to implement it.
Right.
And so now if we're
But all
saying,
of
county,
this
we think you
is
should
that
implement
report.
something
Yeah,
else,
I agree.
I'd be concerned about that.
I could just, please, frame one thing is, so our department took the RFP, when I came, this had been received and we executed it. And we got this strategic plan done and delivered. And I've commented to people on the commission about this and certain people in this room. No one has ever asked our department what we thought of the work. I've never been asked one time by anybody, what do you think of this product? So I think what you're saying is there was a lot of good work done in the tactics of getting to this plan. But I also think there's a lot of good work in looking at it and then taking this forward, because it's too easy to say, build more public housing, there's some things in here that are slam dunks. But I think this is good because the commission received it, but we never knew where it was going to go. Was it going on a shelf? There was talk about a workshop. So I really applaud this group for taking it and giving it traction that then can, because it's a 5-year plan. You could go do one thing for 2 years or one thing. But I think there's a lot of this stuff that seems very simplistic, and
your framework is really good. Like if you could go back a few slides, if you could go back to that, when I took a picture of that, it was your 3 tiers. And if I'm taking too much time, just stop me. But
This one here?
that right there. So we look at this all the time, and I've been looking at this for a year. And I got poo-pooed in one of these meetings the first time I ever said it. But this human infrastructure is really important. We are out of ratio by 10-fold with some other cities with what our service economy into the visitor economy is. So where that gets reflected is if you go and look at the school scores. We are below performance across the board. We have a lot of that school population that's working in this industry. And I think when you start saying develop the industry, we have it, but we're not monetizing the return for the people that are actually doing the work. And I think that's where there's a huge issue.
I totally agree with that. And that's right. It's just when you start that sentence, it starts to sound like we should be diversifying and getting higher paying jobs or whatever.
No,
and we don't have that option. So
we should be developing the pipeline.
yeah,
We have more hotels here, but we have the same amount of hotel rooms in this community that Grand Junction does, which is 6-fold our population. We have a huge opportunity through a CTE program to have a hospitality class. And we do have a hospitality class, but we don't have anything that feeds into a USU or get Marriott down here or one of these badged hotels creating an internship program teaching kids in the hospitality class that a GM in a hotel makes $250K a year.
so
That's under development.
yeah,
So so just so that you know, Chris, because I agree with you, this is just a restatement of that report, and that's why we wanted to get on the phone with Jeremy. This takes everything that's in that report, but it does what we talked about before we had that first meeting, is we said, we want this to be nuanced because they don't live in our community. And so a lot of the things that they're gonna suggest are really great suggestions, but then they're gonna have to be filtered through what it is that we know. So then all of that data shows up later in here that they had, like, for example, we rank 11th among 11 other comparable outdoor recreation communities in pay, in compensation. We're dead frickin' last. The other one is that, like, really stood out for me was that 46% of our community has cost burden housing. And that is such an economic risk factor. And it's not because just we don't have enough housing, it's also because they're not making enough. And this is why this conversation is so important.
Yeah.
Why don't they have enough? It could be because it's seasonal employment. And what you would do to fix that would be to double down on facilitating public lands, not saying, hey, we want Get Biomedical to come in here.
right.
Which is why we need to have really contentious, good, beefy conversations, because the stuff that we agree on, that's beautiful. Like, we can love and light all day long, but then we don't need to waste our time with that. What we need to do is really spend our time on where we don't agree and what is triggering,
Yeah,
because that's how we're gonna get down to the meat and potatoes. But everything that you just said, Ben, that shows up, and I've got that in the developed category.
Okay.
well, I feel like, Chris, your concern of, whoa, you guys went off the rails, like, we should be just facilitating this conversation. I think we should address those concerns and get this to a point that you feel more comfortable that it is a direct link, because it's meant to be. But the point is that I did these kind of projects for other communities, and there is a lot of boilerplate.
It's
Like,
fine.
you're
I
like,
mean, I understand
everyone
this
should
work.
do this.
I worked in
Yeah.
policy reports all my, like,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
many
I
years.
know.
That I get what it is. It's just that there's a power in a process.
Yeah,
We don't want to break in a process. We want
Yes.
to continue a process.
I agree.
And so I think it's very important that we do this in that vein.
And to
That's
Chris's
all.
point, I will say, and I hate this word that we're unique or we're different. But man, when trying to find the comparables, we are unique and we're different. We have such a hyper growth rate of hotel inventory and some other things in a gateway community that it was very hard to find anyone comparable to our actual operating model. And so to support that, I agree with what you're saying on that. We got to be very careful that we don't just, commoditize.
I think we're closer than we think we are.
Yeah.
I think we should do another workshop at some point where we talk about, I think that what you've distilled is really, really great and really productive, and I think could put us in the place. I see it like this, like if we go back and take your concerns about making sure we're connecting and legitimizing the report and not breaking from it, and we do the semantic work to kind of stay in their categories or whatever, and then but we boil it down like it's boiled down so that we can say, here are the facts. Here is what we've learned from this. Bam, bam, bam. This is what we have. And then if we take your concerns, run it through this process, tighten that up a little bit, then we get to these things that Ben is bringing up with how do we do better?
Yeah, this goes to you guys have all done strategic plans, you have a strategy, and then you need your tactics.
Right.
Didn't we talk when we first started having this discussion, like, okay, this is here, what do we want to pursue and what are the tactics? So that's where we're going, right?
Right. But I think before you can get to the tactics, like if one of the reasons that the tactics get so politicized is because people aren't starting from the same set of information. And so I think we can solve these problems. I think we're really close.
I agree that we can solve the problems, and I don't think they're huge.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that too. I think that we agree, like all of us are on the table really on like 90%, and we got to deal with the other 10%. That's all. I guess for me, thinking about how to move forward, it would feel like we were moving forward if the product from this discussion is going to be the language of a revision to the general plan, then let's start working on that. It feels a little tough. Like what I'm struggling with is like, this isn't what, like, I don't need to agree with you on everything that's in here because this isn't what's moving. Like what's moving is like, once we get to something that's moving, then we do need to agree, right? Then we need to vote on it. So like, let's try to get there, because to me, like I said, like, I think, just depending on which 90% gets pulled from this report, like, maybe I don't have any disagreements at all by the time we get to the language on paper. Like maybe we're all actually on the same page already.
Well, and isn't what we're really trying to do here is we're trying to help Grant County's economy. And by help, I mean, make it so that it does work for everyone. And it doesn't really right now by all these measurements, right? The housing insecurity, all these things. So, but to do that, the county has to have an agreed upon understanding of what the economy is. And this report is a big answer to what the economy is. It's not the whole answer. We need to customize it a little bit more to our situation, to our uniqueness. But then it's kind of like, it's almost like, here's I'm not sure exactly where the general plan language is going to come from exactly yet. But I think this work that we're doing to understand really how the economy works and do a little bit of a deep dive into a few possible tactics, almost as examples.
Yeah.
And then you're almost going back and writing the general plan language in a way that would allow you to get to those tactics.
I I want to know what is it that you want to do then? Like what are we trying to accomplish together?
The main thing that I wanted to do all
along. Are we creating our own strategy, and then from that we're going to do the general
No, it's about facilitating use of public lands and turning that into money that makes for a high quality of life for the residents of this county. Yeah. That's what it's about. And this report is a big tool that helps us understand how to do that, but we needed to distill it down, like Melissa did. That's really, really well done, and because Ben is over here asking us for tactics to get to the point where we're going to be able to really start to measure some of these things, which we're getting close. You're trying to pull it back to like, how does it solve a problem on the ground?
Having looked at this in some way, have to deal with this every day. I think you guys are saying the same thing from a different place. But one thing I would say, and this has come to me in the last couple months, is where we could start framing this is how we're different than everywhere else. And the reason I say that is with where we sit in the state of the 29 counties and what we get compared to and how we've gotten audited. The audit is the thing that really pushed it out, is we are a different kind of place. We have no convention business here. We don't have the drive-through traffic that the St. George's do that have the major highways coming through. So yes, by default, the people that are coming to this destination are coming for what you're saying. We also are missing out on what we're being compared to has, which are convention bureaus and convention centers and high traffic with expense accounts. I mean, our restaurants, they're very rarely probably, I don't know the date of this, but there's probably very few restaurant bills being paid off expense accounts by businesses being here.
May I say something that could potentially be really polarizing intentionally?
Yeah,
To say something that's really polarizing?
Is this another one of your cold showers?
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
But then,
And this is,
will you say that? And then I want to check in with Randy and Dave and
Yes.
Jasmine and folks who are online, because we've been dominating around the table, so.
100%. So everything, Ben, that you're saying, I agree with 100%. And it's the reason why I wanted us to get on the phone with Jeremy. And it's the reason why I went through this report with a fine tooth comb, and I did follow the report, and I will tell you why. There's a reason why, and Ben, I must have said this 25 times on the call with Jeremy. I believe that our biggest challenge in this county is resident perception. And the reason why is because if we can't agree on what the situation analysis is, and I pulled the situation analysis exactly from that report. I didn't make it up anything. Nothing in here is something that I did on my own. It is literally pulled every piece of it from that report and from conversation with Jeremy.
And just
These are
slightly
not
different
my
titles
original
some of the
ideas.
times, but
Yeah.
these ideas are all the
These are
same.
not my,
Right.
and the reason why I did it this way and why it made sense, and I tried to break it from different standpoints is, we don't have convention facility. We don't have these things, and it's because we haven't been able to say as a community, we're gonna fully embrace this thing, or we're going to accept that this is how it is and we don't have any other options right now, so we're gonna come up with a really detailed plan and a lot of money to make it something different. And what I'm hoping to get out of this for this group is if we can take all the information in that report, all of this data, and we can agree on what the situation analysis is, it makes those decisions easier about, do we want to build a convention facility? Do we want to double down on this thing and do more product development with outdoor recreation? Do we want to embrace it more? And it's the reason why I wanted to be really realistic about the diversification piece, and I did pull that directly from that conversation in the report as well, is just because we say that we want to diversify and move in a different direction doesn't make us have things that we don't currently have.
Yeah.
So what you just said about we are totally different, we're totally different because honestly, in my perception, our resident sentiment is still in a place that we're trying to decide if we want more of that, less of that, or any of that. And if you look at those first 3 slides, what I'm suggesting is that's what we've got.
Yeah, and we're asking the wrong questions and we're framing it as this either or thing that doesn't even exist as a choice. But I think the concerns you brought up are really important, and I think we need to go back and sort of do the work to connect the dots and make sure that, yeah, I see all of this in the report, and I see this as a distillation of that, but I see that we abandoned one of the structures, and maybe we should go back to it. Yeah, maybe it's okay, but I do think it's a really important point, because we do not want to, we're trying to distill it and make it actionable.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
what
that to
we're
me,
trying
the
to do.
key isn't getting consensus around this table. It's about getting consensus at the commission. And so to me, the question is, how are we moving this to the commission? And
They're
like, in
using,
what way?
they are using the term Trails to Tomorrow in their meetings, by the way.
But it's only at a
But
40,000
super high
foot
level, yeah.
I know, but I'm saying the words are being.
Yeah,
But this is the point. Our job is, if we're gonna support any kind of progress on economic development in this county, we're the ones who are willing to do the deep dive into this report and to really understand it and use our personal expertise to make it sure it is matching.
Totally, and I just think that the best way for us to put it in front of the commission is with the language and to revise the
Yeah, I
general
hear
plan, which is why, to me, that's like the key, one of the key ingredients. There's
Yeah.
probably several, but
I
that's
think,
one of the key.
I think
I'm
it's an
sorry.
up and down thing. Like, we have to do the general plan, the high level language, but we also have to go to the tactics that Ben was talking about and make sure this framework that we're distilling here is gonna address both those issues. I mean, the whole point, I think, is to help the commission see the world as clearly as possible so that they're not making decisions based on politics or preconceived ideas, that they really have the facts. Like, this is the state of the patient.
I agree with
And
that.
given that this is the state of the patient, here are the options for how to fix the patient. And so if we can do that, we're really helping our community a lot,
Yeah.
because otherwise they're being asked to make decisions which they've got a million decisions to make, and they don't always have as deep an information as they could. So if we can get this to a point where we agree it comes from the plan, and we could give examples of how you could use it to determine tactics, then I think we have a better chance of coming up with general plan language that will make sense based on this report.
Okay, I'm gonna put a period there.
Yeah.
With an exclamation point, because we do have another topic before we adjourn. So I want to check in with Randy and Jasmine and Dave. You've been listening to this conversation. You've been seeing the outlines the outline that Melissa has provided us for this conversation. So I invite any or all of you to jump in with a reaction or response, suggestions, or questions.
I'll go ahead. I was at the workshop with the group when we discussed kind of how the strategic plan, was a great amount of work, but also may have missed a couple of the things that are more like nuanced to Grand County. But I still agree with Chris that we can't just leave behind all of that. And I don't believe we are, but I think I really appreciate, Melissa, the work on this, and just for our group to break this down. I also think that our role as an advisory board, isn't to come up with all of the answers, but some direction, for the general plan language, and some strategy and action items for the. So I would like to see us get towards that. And I'm not sure what we use this for, other than this conversation.
Well, Jasmine, thanks for participating in the work group. I suspect we're going to have to schedule another one of those probably before the end of the year, or if not, early in the new year. Thank you. Dave, were you going to chime in?
Yeah, I'm going to come at a different direction here. I mean, I realize this is a county plan, but wouldn't it be better to have some buy-in from the city as well? I mean, you guys are talking about, a Grand County plan. That's a word. But there's the city is, you're going to need buy-in there as well. And how much involvement has the city had in this?
We were invited from day one.
I know, but Ben, this is something that.
Oh, I mean, it's open to them. We had a representative in our steering committee from the city. We also asked to be involved in the city strategic plan, and first time we saw it was when it was announced in the paper. So, and it's there's no boundary. I mean, yes, from day one we elicited participation from the city. So, and if we need to do it a different way, but in no way have they been held out.
Yeah, well, we have a representative here. I think it's a good idea to think about, right, how these recommendations could go. Is there a way for it to go in city council, like building that into the process? And then the strategic plan is an annual budgeting thing, and the meetings are open. So that is open for other people to be there.
Not the retreat.
It is a public meeting.
Okay, well, we had everybody, we had the city invited to everything and put them on the steering committee. So I don't mind. That's good feedback.
Sure.
But I just want everyone to know, we made Herculean efforts to make sure they were every step of the way.
Sure.
Why can't our committee, once we do our homework and get sorted, these things that we've identified that we need to sort, and we're like starting to think about getting closer to presenting it to the county commission, we can also make a presentation to the city. I mean,
Absolutely, it should.
we're producing good work here that, that is just building on the thing we paid for and the thing that has been adopted or sort of, but, or is in the play anyway. So yeah, I mean, I think that when you invite people and they don't come, you just have to go to them sometimes. So maybe we just do that, because I think it's a really good point, Dave, that we should make sure the city is in the loop. And I don't think there's anything in this. The people I know that are serving for the city right now get most of this stuff. And I don't think I think what we're doing is, the really important work that we're doing right now is framing it in a way that will be useful to actually develop tactics. So both get it adopted as part of the general plan, get some general agreement on the basic framework, and then that means that when we start working on tactics, they're going to be way more effective than they would have been without having done this work and getting that general understanding. Because, I mean, I've lived here for 30 years, and the county commission has often said, like, diversification, and sort of banged their head against the wall for years and years trying to change things around here. And now we're at a point where we understand what we're doing, and we have the opportunity to improve it, and I think it's really exciting. So, and yes, we should include the city for sure.
I'm going to check and see if Randy, if you have some thoughts about or contributions to this conversation.
Hi, thank you, Forrest. I'm really liking what I'm seeing here on these slides. It looks like there's several more slides to go through, and I don't think we're going to have the time to go through those, but I'm really liking what I'm seeing so far. Very appreciative of Melissa and her work, and look forward to seeing the rest of this slide deck here in the future.
We did make it through the end of the slide deck. I just brought it back up because this seemed like the salient points for roundtable discussion. But yeah, everyone after this will get the slides that Melissa created. So I'll
great. Thank you, Ben.
The thing that I'll add to that too is that there's a Word doc.
Okay.
And what I did was, so all of the points that you mentioned, Ben, about all the different things, like do we include, not include, whatever. It took the same framework. And again, if the framework is wrong and the approach is wrong, then that's okay. We just need to break that apart and redo it. But I took all of the recommendations from the Charles Tichimora report for all the tactics, put those in the framework also, just so that we can kind of get an idea of how it might look as we start to work on the general plan. Meaning it goes from area of focus to objective to action to deliverable to key measurement. And I just pulled that out of the report. So it'll give you an idea like, oh, if I were to look at a list of tactics, how would they fit in the different categories?
I also think, to Jasmine's point, there was a lot that is not in here that could be added in here. And we should maybe address a few of those at some point in the next workshop.
Okay, just process question. We do have another item on the agenda. Were you going to comment about that agenda item?
Oh, I was just going to say, in the interest of talking about this, I can make that an email.
Okay, so that mystery item is the visit to Grand County by the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity team. Deborah and Colette have been very helpful in putting together sort of an outline for that. It happens to be on December 18th, Wednesday the 18th, which was the day we had scheduled to have our monthly meeting. It will be morning, probably 8 o'clock until early afternoon, because their team will be coming down the day before, staying overnight, and heading back to Salt Lake after lunch. So again, Wednesday, December 18, probably 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, possibly a little bit later than that. So we wouldn't necessarily meet have a meeting on that day unless we chose to do it immediately after their visit and their departure. Now, we did have a a rambunctious, I will say, discussion on on November 6th, and that's what brought us here. So thank all of you who were involved in that. I think the question right now for us is, do we want to set a target date in early 2025 when we want to have recommendation, when we want to have a draft of edits to or replacement for the economic health section of the county's general plan? And if we do, we should set that and plan our work back to that. And I'll begin by saying, I've got $20 that I'm going to put on the table for anybody who can prove to me that all of the 10 previous strategic plans have been discussed as energetically, as thoroughly, and as brilliantly as we have in the last almost 2 hours.
As the one that Dave Sacherson lent me from the 80s, 1981, I think this is just an update to and this one takes a wider space on the bookshelf, I'll say that. But one thing back to the 18th, just that's the Deborah, is it not the director, but the
She's
head?
not here anymore.
Oh, okay, it's Ryan Starks, the head of Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, doing his 24 and 24, which was to visit 24 counties in the year 24. And this is our third reschedule, so I think they're trying to get it in 24. So just so you know, that's what that is.
So I was confused about that. Do you want us, what is our role in the visit?
Good question.
I don't think, right now, the board's role doesn't exist. I'm planning it. I want to make people aware of it. I'll be reaching out to certain people depending on the activities they want to do with us, because it's going to be a very rushed agenda of some site visits. So it's really just more to make you all aware. We might have some of you on it. We definitely can't have the whole board because it's just going to be a lot of people in general. But really just wanted to make you all aware that it's happening.
And it's very much in support of showing where that grant money in the past has gone, and that,
Yes.
so we'll be looking at the housing, childcare, probably something with the chamber.
So I assume that Ryan is an appointed position
Yes,
and possibly confirmed or just
I
appointed?
think he just gets hired.
Okay, but I think of this the way I think of when I host our US congressman. It's going to be one of those, I've got to show you this, and this in a very short period of time.
Mhm.
And so it's going to be that kind of, almost a drive-by or speed dating visit.
Yeah.
And so and actually Colette and Deborah are really sort of driving the agenda. Our job is to figure out how to have representation from the community at large and from this board, TCAB, whomever.
Great,
So-
so if you need us, you're gonna let us know. If
Yeah.
we're- If
Yes.
you need to-
Yeah.
If you need a conference room with windows, for example.
Hopefully we'll be outside for most of it.
Yeah,
I'll let you know.
but if you need one, I am happy to.
Yeah, thank you for
provide
that. Thank you for that.
Okay,
Okay, can we come back and sort of conclude this conversation? Because this is really robust and I'm really glad, Lexi, you were here.
yeah.
And that Jasmine, Dave, and Brandy were involved. Deborah has been a great local resource for us. And I assume that Deborah and probably Colette will be here.
I believe.
Huh?
I believe at least Deborah
Okay.
Colette as well.
Okay, so I thought this was a good conversation. My observation is that the working group that met a couple of weeks ago created a framework for us thinking about how we can actually focus what's in the Trails to Tomorrow plan and begin working on the steps needed to review the document, review what's in the document that you have summarized in your working group and put together some very specific ways to present it to people. Where I saw very clearly the connection between Trails to Tomorrow, was in the earlier document, or maybe it's in that one where it indicates which places in the Trails to Tomorrow you've extracted very specific recommendations from that. And I know that it gets referred to as TTT, Trails to Tomorrow.
I was tired of typing the whole thing.
I can imagine.
Is what we always do.
But I also remember early in my professional life, somebody telling me that TTT means things take time. So the strategic plan is a 5-year plan, right? And this is really, for me, this is really the spark that gets us moving. So thank you for that. The question is, what do you want to do next? Do you want to try to plan a meeting, a work group session before the end of the year? Do you want to have time to review the Word doc and the presentation and make suggestions, review it, and then we come back to the January meeting with a work session on strengthening what we have there and start preparing a draft of the economic health or healthy economy section of the general plan?
Yeah, yes, all those things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like 2 key things to do. And one of them is to turn that presentation that Melissa did a great job of putting together, and then we need to finalize a few agreements and a few things, that's all, into language that can go in the general plan. And then I think we need to think about what's the other deliverable that we're working on here. Because there clearly is one that everybody wants to put in front of the city council and get like situational awareness buy-in, like, but how do what's the vehicle for that? I think is a question that I don't think we have to answer that right now.
I've got, so just so you're aware, it's to pick apart. But if you go back up to the purpose of the project, we had talked originally about wanting to be able to organize the information and distill the data for 2 reasons. The first one was that there was a rewrite that was wanted / needed on the healthy economy section of the general plan. The second one is hopefully if we can organize the information and kind of have a list of priorities that we're looking for, that's what we wanted to use to be able to socialize, advertise, get out into the community about some of the strategies and things we're hoping to see for the communities grant for next year, the Rural Communities Grant. And then we would use that as a filter to say, these types of projects, please come and apply. This is the filter through which we'll be evaluating. Is that correct?
I think that is correct, but I'm feeling like maybe there's still something else that we're trying to accomplish here collectively without naming, and I'm not sure what that is. Like,
well, I think one thing we got to do is if we are going to pick these lanes and we're doing situational analysis, we've got to baseline some kind of metric. And I'll give you the example. When they came back, they said one of their recommendations was to increase school performance.
Yes.
It's like, okay, you can say that, but where's the school performance? And they didn't have any metrics. And I said, you guys are a data team. And they told me why they couldn't get them. I said, really? Then you didn't look hard enough. And so they spent 2 more weeks, and we have a data set that Ben and I have sat down with Kate Finley, and there's a couple things we have a question on. But it gives us a baseline. If we can compare where our K8s are in some kind of reference to someone else, then that's one thing. If we can care. I know that Park City did a strategic plan where they looked at hotel housekeeping crew wage as a ratio of room rate for that night. Maybe we have some metrics we could chase down to understand what our situational analysis baseline measurement is, because that's the needle we'll want to change, isn't it?
There were a lot of data points that were missing. I found the same thing. Ben and I, on the call with Jeremy, I asked Jeremy about a few of those places for us to be able to chase down additional metrics. It became clear in the conversation with him that we had some avenues that we could pursue. Some of them are identify pockets of cash and budget to get a research assistant or to pay USU to get some of that data. Because you're absolutely right, it was missing. And that's why we were kind of having that call with him. You know, there are things that we can do, and he gave us some places to go to be able to track down some additional data. But if you look, when you go deeper, and that's why I wanted you guys to be able to look underneath the hood of where I put things and some of that additional detail, is because there are so many things that go into it. Like you were saying, if you don't get your graduation rates up, people don't want to move to your community because they've got kids and that's the first thing that they're researching. Talk to me a little bit about your graduation and your test rates. Or, you know, what you were saying about housekeeping and the wage. If we were to agree and say, we really want to double down on this, so instead of diversifying by bringing in different industries, we want to diversify by going deeper in different ways in this one, maybe housekeeping then becomes a year-round proposition. And so they're making money throughout the year instead of being unemployed and on unemployment for 4 months of the year. And so I guess what, for me, when you say we're getting at something without really getting at the something, I think what I feel us naturally pulling toward is to consensus in a plan that works and to actually let the rubber meet the road and agree, and to create a feedback loop with the community around community sentiment of, here's what the situation is, here's why the situation is the way that it is, and now these are sort of some of the decisions that we need to make based on that, but we have to agree that this is the data set, that these are the facts.
But I think it is, I think everything you said is right, but I think when a government entity commissions a study, what they're looking for is, because elected officials come from all different backgrounds and have all different ideas, and they're suddenly thrown together and they're supposed to make decisions. And so normally when they commission a study, they're looking for an anchor or a base, you know, and it doesn't have to be so much data as it is. I mean, the facts have to be backed up by data, but it's basically a view of the world and a set of assumptions or a set of realities or whatever that give them the basic. Like in a business setting, you say, we know that people need guides in the outdoors, so we're going to be an outfitter and provide guides. Like we are meeting the need or whatever. We don't want people to get lost. Like in this situation, it's kind of like, we're trying to make life better in Greene County for everyone who lives here. How do we do that? So one way is to, if we want our economy to be better and we don't want to just talk about shred on or lock it up, you know, grow or NIMBY, shut the gate or grow uncontrollably, which is pretty much the conversation in the public at this point. If we want to get to a smarter, better, more effective level, you have to have a picture of what is our status and what are our opportunities and what are our choices. So that's what, I mean, any consultant that writes a report like this and then has a group of people care this much about it, that is winning already. And the fact that we're trying to distill it in a way, because they had boilerplate, they had a framework, they had a whole system, they were going for all these pages and we asked them for more pages. But if we can come back and say, this is how we can turn this into action, I think that's the whole point. How are we going to help our county commission turn the valuable information here and the realities about what Greene County's challenges and opportunities are into action? That's the question that we're trying to answer.
So that's our goal.
Yeah.
That's a goal statement?
Yeah.
Turn this
That's
into
the goal.
action.
The goal, so my question is, what's the process to, not like the every step along the way, but what's the vehicle we're gonna take to socialize or to communicate or to gain consensus around that the goal and that sort of situational awareness and the process.
Sure.
Exactly what you just talked about. Like, how do we put that in front of the commission? How do we put that in front of the community? Like, what are the vehicles we use? One of them is language in the general plan. We're all in agreement about that. That's one of the vehicles we use to move this forward. What are the other vehicles that we use to move
I think there could be these examples of tactics, like going the other, like we've got this kind of blob in the middle and we need to turn it into high level language that could go into the general plan, but we also need to turn it into tactics that could be used on the ground.
These could be as drilled down as an agenda item. So for instance, if like, say you took a housing initiative, if there was something specific, it could be an agenda item to get this point person doing this or solving for this. It's, and that was the talk when this was presented to the commission. It's like, what is, because they were asking the same question, what's the next? I don't think you take this big broad plan and it's something that gets moved forward. I think it's got to be in pieces. Like right now, these are the 3 priorities, or is it?
I think that's one option, is suggesting a list of priorities for the next year. This is a 5-year strategy. What does year 1 look
Where
like? Something
we've got
like
those
that.
childhood tomorrow. So in the 4 focuses, like first of all, I'm not assuming that we're agreeing that those are the right 4 focuses or whatever. But assuming that we do, whatever framework that we choose, if we go back to their original 3, whatever. What I think feels like a natural step, and the reason why I included all of these is because I think it's a useful discussion to go through all of the tactics that they suggested and even start assigning like in, out, priority. This is an A, a B, a C. We should start doing this tomorrow. This is 3 years later, whatever, because I don't like reinventing the wheel, and we paid them money, and I'm with you. They already went through the process. These are all their suggestions and recommendations, and I put them in the doc so that we could do that and go through. And I personally, and that's why I wanted to call out the ones that were in yellow, is as I went through the framework, the ones in yellow didn't hold up. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't do that. I still included them because like you said, it's a process and we paid for it, and it's not on me to take it out. But those were kind of some of my suggestions. I think if we can look at the framework and decide what about it does or doesn't work, and then look at the tactics that are in it and then prioritize them or say that's in or out, it applies, it doesn't, and then add our ones that aren't in there that they haven't included, then you kind of get to a 1, 3, 5-year priority list. You're like, this is the number 1 thing that we want to do this year starting tomorrow or yesterday.
When we were working on the sustainability plan, one of the things that was useful to me was we asked them to do some of that prioritizing for us. And we ended up with this kind of matrix, like the community supports these things have impact. And then in that particular one that wouldn't necessarily apply to this, we ended up with like 6 that were like, these are the go now projects. And that is helpful. And it also meant that some of these things may be similar to what you highlighted in yellow that they came up with, they ended up at the bottom of the list. Like, nah, that was an idea. So I really like that direction that you need stuff for the general plan. We need kind of like tactics and metrics for, are we making any progress on the things that we prioritized? And then that like the kind of third direction of this of like, these are the things that would anchor priorities for applications to grants. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to tie those 3 like things together.
So now we have to tie things together.
Yeah.
For this agenda. Is there any interest in, well, first of all, first steps, circulating both the beautiful PowerPoint and the Word doc for people to review.
Mm-hmm.
We've got some energy, we've got some traction. Do you want to convene a work session in December, possibly before the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity comes, or do you want to wait and take this up in January? And at that point, set the target date for when we want to start presenting information in various forms, whether it's to commission, whether it's to commission committees, whether it's a more formal presentation inviting city. I'd be interested in hearing what the city says about economic development. So we've got several options, and I'm checking for preferences or things that you don't want to do.
I guess what I would want to do and offer to do is to try to make some progress on at least putting together an outline of a revised general plan section for economic health. With the caveat that as the conversations could move on with sort of everything else, that would inform and sort of lead to revisions of that before it's ready to go. But to me, that feels very tangible and something that I'd like to see happen for sure by next year. So I'd be happy to take a crack at just like trying to get something that we can circulate before our next meeting.
I think that'd be amazing. I think that, I've been involved in writing a few bills at the federal level, and you start out with this, well, sometimes it starts out with whereas, blah, 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 whereas, blah, blah, blah. And, but those things, those whereases are actually really important because those are the reason you're writing the bill.
Sure.
Because of this and because of that and because of this, we want to do these things. And so part of what we're doing here and part of what this report was and part of what you just did in the presentation is those whereases. It's like, this is
the things that we agreed to.
These are the things that are, this is the status quo. This is the situation. And so I think and therefore, because of this situation, our dependence on public land and some of these other things.
And that's sort of what the general plan sections, they do, it's different than that. It's not the legalese, but it's a similar format where it starts with the situation analysis, very brief, and then leads to what's the plan. So I think that would be, we would try to do something similar
and
there.
If we
and it
can
would
use
certainly build off
consistent,
of what Lisa did. I would.
If we can agree on some language that is consistent, that these certain topics in the general plan, and then they're in our overview that we're preparing as a committee, and then they track to the report, then we're winning.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
Okay, so I'm gonna go out and buy a quill and
Don't
some
forget the powdered
parchment.
wig.
And some parchment. And I think, do we graciously accept Chris's offer? It sounds like one tangible step forward. And we'll have had time to review both the presentation and the Word doc. And are we at liberty to forward items to you as we go through that?
Sure.
Between now and January?
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna have a meeting in December, I put it on my calendar for December 4. Because I'll be back in town after travel, and we'll work on putting together something to send you all via email.
Perfect.
So if you have something you want to send me before December 4 that you want to see in my first draft, just feel free to send me, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, do we have a sundial or an hour glass to set to make sure to remind us to send something to you before December 4th?
We need
So we have the Christmas break, so we have Thanksgiving break, so we have 3 days next week, and then we're past that. So we're 2 weeks away.
I'm trying to extend I'm trying to refer to your offer as a magisterial effort to put and capture this discussion with some other ideas.
Yeah.
Sort of a declaration of moving forward.
To a good point, like what Dave was saying, is there a way to get the city, we have a way to connect through the city to get that input to Chris as well?
Not by December 4th.
I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that I think maybe the city wouldn't need to have like official feedback from council or something at this point. It might be something that would go.
Jason Taylor
a little bit later.
was on the project. You might ask him just if he has something he'd like to see added in.
Or we can also, once we have something, we can share it with them.
That's kind of
Which I
what I'm
think makes sense, and then
thinking.
we can ask for feedback
Yeah.
from Jason.
I
and
think they
anyone
might
else
need a
who
little
would
too
like
much coaching to understand
where
what
we are
like
in
the
the
project
process.
is. Yeah, so it's a little easier to say, here's a draft. It's the very first draft. So, but yes, I think the city would be involved. I appreciate
So
you
make sure
inviting
we're
us.
No, that's a great way to do it.
And having read all the previous strategic plans, do I get the 20?
Do you know what?
Who-
Unless
what
you
depends who you-
do crap like this
I
and
think-
people go, but I don't want that, I want something different, you don't get anything.
Right.
So I feel like that's, mine's always like, hey, let's do this. And then 30 people will dogpile on and go, I hate that. And then you get something done.
Yeah.
Which I
Thank you so
love.
much.
So
for
I'm like,
getting
Yeah,
involved.
thank you so much.
Having lived here for over 30 years and not seen any strategic plans put into place, Do I get the 25?
No, because you should have been working on it.
I didn't work.
How about,
Let's go back to fourth spot.
Thanks, guys.
I'll take that under advisement.
Wait, we gotta adjourn the meeting. Oh, real quick, Lisa and Chris, if you want to stay on the board, you do have to send me an application.
Okay.
What?
Your terms are up at the end of the year, so I need an application from you all. You can just,
We want to
Apply for the job.
they're mandatory, you have to
Oh,
get it in.
I don't, okay.
You could just send me literally the application you sent in originally. That's fine. But I just need to get an application. We have to do interviews at our last meeting of the year.
Oh, got it.
That's all.
So what's, do you have,
Are you
Jasmine,
sure you want me to
Dave,
do
is
that?
there a date?
Randy,
Something
we
like
are
that?
adjourned.
Doesn't matter.
Thanks for joining us
By
online.
our next meeting.
We missed you in here.
Just send me the old application.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.